Imagine two twins, nearly identical twins. They share the same DNA, right? But somehow they end up with totally different personalities, different looks even. Well, that's kind of like the fascinating relationship we see between two really prominent Linux desktop distributions, Ubuntu and Kubuntu. So today we're doing a deep dive into these two. They get confused a lot. Our mission really is to pull back the curtain a bit. We want to explore what makes them so similar underneath, but surprisingly different when you actually use them day to day. We're hoping to give you some clarity on, what sets them apart and maybe even get you interested in trying one out yourself. A lot of our insights today, just so you know, come from a really comprehensive comparison. It digs into the nitty-gritty of Ubuntu versus Kubuntu, written by someone who's actually used both as their main computer for quite a while, daily driven them, as they say. Okay, so let's jump right in. Picture this. Two computers, side by side. One's running Ubuntu, the other Kubuntu. What's the very first thing you notice?
Oh, absolutely. The visuals, they look dramatically different. That's the first, most striking thing for any user, hands down.
Right. So why is that? What's causing that huge visual split?
Well, it comes down to something fundamental. They're desktop environments. That's the software layer that dictates the whole look and feel, how you click around, how you interact with everything. Ubuntu uses GNOME. Kubuntu, on the other hand, uses KDE Plasma. Different philosophies, different designs.
Okay, so tell us about Ubuntu's GNOME. What's that like?
GNOME is very minimalist. It's designed to feel intuitive, maybe especially if you're used to how tablets or those two-in-one laptops work. The main desktop screen itself is super clean. Pretty empty, actually. But then you hit the application menu, and you get this nice tray of icons, bright colors, rounded edges, very distinct. You might have seen pictures like the Ubuntu 25.04 desktop the source mentions, that clean, modern look.
Okay, clean and modern. And Kubuntu with KDE Plasma, how does that compare?
It's quite a contrast, really. KDE Plasma's default look feels much more, shall we say, traditional. A lot of people compare it to like Windows 8 or Windows 10.
Ah, okay. Familiar territory for many, then.
Exactly. You've got that taskbar right there at the bottom, which feels very familiar.
Yeah.
Application launcher on the left, pinned apps, active apps next to it. And then on the right side of the taskbar, you've got your system tray stuff, time, date, notifications, little mini apps they call applets. Again, the source has visuals, the Kubuntu 25.04 desktop, that show this layout really clearly.
That visual difference is huge, like you said. Night and day, almost. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The source says they share the exact same base, the same foundation. That seems counterintuitive given how different they look. What does that shared base actually mean for someone using them?
Right. That's where the identical twins idea really clicks. It means they use the exact same software repositories.
Repositories, like the place they get their apps from.
Precisely. Think of them as these huge shared digital libraries. All the software, all the updates, they come from the same place for both systems. Specifically Ubuntu's repositories. And this is really significant. It means if you have, say, Ubuntu 25.04 and Kubuntu 25.04, both fully updated, when you go to install a piece of software, maybe a web browser or an image editor,
You get the exact same version on both.
exactly the same version, which might not sound like a big deal, but in the Linux world, it kind of is.
How so?
Well, different Linux distributions often package software differently. One might have a slightly older, maybe more stable version of an app, while another might have the absolute latest bleeding-edge version with newer features, but maybe less testing.
Ah, I see. So there can be variations.
Definitely. The source gives a good example with KDE's screen capture tool, Spectacle. On Kubuntu 24.04, maybe you get an older version, say from early 2024. It works fine, but maybe it lacks newer stuff like screen recording. But then on a different distro, like Garuda Linux, which pushes for the newest software, you might get a much later version, maybe from mid-2025 with all those bells and whistles.
Okay. But with Ubuntu and Kubuntu.
You don't get that inconsistency.
Right.
Because they're pulling from the same source library, you get that consistency. Same app, same version. It's reliable.
Got it. So the core software underneath, the versions you install, are identical, but the interface is totally different. What about the apps that come pre-installed? The ones you get right out of the box, do they differ too?
They do, yeah. That's another layer difference. Even though the available software in the repositories is the same, the default set of graphical apps they choose to include is different. It aligns with their desktop environments.
Makes sense. So what does Ubuntu give you?
Ubuntu mostly uses apps from the GNOME core collection. So for file browsing, you get Nautilus. For music, there's an app literally called Music, codenamed Loop. And for the command line, It's GNOME terminal.
And Kubuntu.
Kubuntu leans heavily on apps developed by the KDE community, designed to fit well with the Plasma desktop. So instead of Nautilus, you get Dolphin, which is a really powerful file manager, by the way. For music, it includes Elisa. And for the terminal, you use Console.
So different apps, but they do the same basic jobs, right? File browsing, music, terminal.
Exactly. Both sets do the same core functions, and importantly, they're all free and open source software. They just look different and are developed by different teams. And it's worth mentioning, both systems also come bundled with really popular, essential open source apps that most people need. Things like the LibreOffice suite for documents and spreadsheets, and Mozilla Firefox for web browsing. Those are usually standard.
Okay. And you mentioned flexibility earlier because they share repositories.
Right. This is the neat part. If you're using, say, Kubuntu, but you really miss the simplicity of Ubuntu's file manager, Nautilus,
You can just install it.
you can just install it easily.
Yeah.
Because it's right there in the shared software library. So you can mix and match apps to some extent, even if the core desktop looks different.
That is pretty flexible. But, okay, it brings up a question I know people ask. If they share the same base and you can install apps from the other environment, why not just take Ubuntu and install the KDE Plasma desktop on top of it? Wouldn't that basically make it Kubuntu? Is that a good shortcut?
The classic question.
Yeah.
And based on experience, and what the source also points out, it's generally what's not recommended.
Oh, why not? What's the catch?
There are a few catches. First, there's what we often call bloat. Both GNOME and KDE, these big desktop environments, they come with their own sets of background services, libraries, configuration tools, a whole ecosystem. If you install both onto the same system, you're essentially duplicating a lot of that underlying machinery. It takes up significantly more disk space than just having one clean installation.
Okay, so it's heavier. Any other downsides?
Yeah, potentially more significant is the increased chance of, well, weirdness, conflicts, bugs, things not quite working together smoothly. You're asking two quite different systems to share the same space, and sometimes they step on each other's toes. The source author even mentions a personal experience trying to mix GNOME apps, which use something called GTK for their look, with KDE apps, which use Qt, felt unwieldy and Frankensteinish. Things might not look consistent, settings might conflict, it can just feel messy.
Right, not exactly an optimized experience.
Not really. It can be done, but it's often not worth the potential hassle. So the usual advice is, if you're on Ubuntu and you decide, hey, I really want that KDE Plasma experience, the cleanest way is to back up all your important files.
Always back up.
Always. And then just do a fresh install of Kubuntu, overwriting the old Ubuntu system, start fresh with the environment you want.
That makes sense. Avoid the Frankenstein monster.
Pretty much.
Okay, we've covered the look, the software base, the apps, even how not to combine them. But what about the people behind it all? Does the philosophy or structure of the organizations building Ubuntu and Kubuntu differ? And does that, trickle down into the user experience at all?
That's a great question, and it touches on something maybe less visible day to day, but definitely significant organizationally. Ubuntu, as many know, is the flagship product of a company called Canonical. They're a private organization. Their focus is broad building open source communities, yes, but also making Linux secure, reliable, manageable, especially for businesses. They offer paid support options, particularly for enterprise clients.
Okay, so Canonical is behind Ubuntu. What about Kubuntu?
Kubuntu is produced by the KDE community, and that community is overseen by KDE EV, which is actually a German nonprofit organization. Their stated mission is quite idealistic, to bring open, reliable, stable, and monopoly-free computing to the everyday user. It's very community-driven.
So mostly volunteers.
Primarily, yes.
Yeah.
The KDE community is largely made up of passionate volunteers from all over the world. So most direct support comes from fellow community members through forums, wikis, chat rooms, that sort of thing. Although, interestingly, you can get paid support specifically for Kubuntu too. It is available.
So Canonical, a company driving Ubuntu, KDE, a nonprofit community driving Kubuntu, they sound quite different. Are they competitors?
You might think so, but here's a key insight that the source highlights, and it's really important.
What?
They absolutely do not operate just independently or in competition. There's actually significant collaboration.
Really? How does that work?
Well, for instance, Canonical is actually an official patron of KDE. They provide financial support to the KDE project.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And Kubuntu isn't some rogue project. It's officially promoted by Canonical as one of Ubuntu's official flavors. It's part of the family, so to speak.
So it's less competition, more collaboration within the broader Linux ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a really good example of mutual support in open source development. It ensures both projects benefit and ultimately that you, as the user, benefit from a stronger, more unified platform, even with its different flavors. It's quite a positive relationship, actually.
That's really interesting, that level of partnership behind the scenes. Okay, so let's try and tie this all together. We've seen how Ubuntu and Kubuntu, even though they share that same core foundation,
Hmm.
they give you really quite different experiences, different look and feel from the desktop environments, different default apps, even different organizational vibes behind them, though they work together. So what does this all boil down to for, someone listening who might be curious?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that choice is good, but understanding the choice is key. The absolute best way to figure out which one feels right for you, which one clicks with how you like to work, is simply to try them out.
Right. Get your hands dirty, so to speak.
Exactly. And the good news is there are several ways to do that without messing up your current computer setup at all.
Okay, what are the options?
Well, probably the easiest, though maybe not the best for judging performance, is you can often emulate them right in your web browser these days. Some sites offer that, give you a quick look at the interface.
Okay, like a quick peek.
Yeah. For a more real feel, the classic method is creating a bootable USB drive. You download the system image, use a tool to write it to a USB stick, and then you can boot your computer directly from the USB drive. It runs live without installing anything permanently unless you choose to.
That gives you a proper test drive.
It does. Lets you see how it performs on your actual hardware. And for those who like tinkering a bit more, there are cool tools like Ventoy. Ventoy lets you put multiple operating system images like both Ubuntu and Kubuntu onto a single USB drive. Then, when you boot from it, you get a menu to choose which one you want to try out at that moment. Pretty handy.
Oh, that's clever. One USB stick, multiple test drives.
Exactly. So plenty of ways to experiment safely.
Great. So trying them is the best way to decide. Which leads me to a final thought, something maybe for you listening to ponder. We've talked a lot about the technical similarities and the visual differences. It makes you wonder, in this world where we can customize so much digitally, just how much does the interface, the visual design, the way we interact with our computer,
Mhm.
how much does that actually shape our productivity, our comfort, our overall satisfaction? Maybe even more sometimes than the code running deep underneath.